It has many names. The Rock, Alcatraz, Alcatraz. Over 1,500 men have lived in this crucible of anger, frustration, and violence. And there isn't a single visitor who doesn't feel that legacy. The Rock no longer houses inmates, but the haunting question remains. Do the souls of prisoners still walk these ruins? Cross this threshold to places of mystery. Just across the bay from San Francisco, Alcatraz draws over 1 million visitors a year from around the world. They arrive by the boatload.
Welcome to the Rock. Welcome to Alcatraz.
They expect a safe window into the turbulent past, a momentary taste of life behind bars. They don't know there's another secret world hidden within these walls. But this ex-convict knows, and despite his years of imprisonment, he's compelled to return here time and time again.
I believe that this island is haunted. Every time I went to them cell blocks, somehow or another I could feel it. It was the island of the damned.
This journalist came here a skeptic, but one shocking moment changed his views on the supernatural.
I do not believe in ghosts, so when this occurred, it put a whole new pathway for me personally.
While roaming the halls of Alcatraz, this paranormal investigator also had a personal encounter with the spirit world.
I found one entity. So, to me, I believe it's haunted, and I believe that this entity belongs to the prison.
Alcatraz was the harshest of the federal prisons. Inmates hardly ever had visitors and were allowed little time in the yard. They spent most of their day alone, confined to a 5-by-9-foot cell. Inmates were banished to this island prison not by the courts, but by the wardens from other penitentiaries who couldn't control them.
They call all those guys the incorrigibles, and that's why we were sent here.
Leon Whitey Thompson, a convicted bank robber, spent 4 years on Alcatraz. He was sent there from McNeil Island Penitentiary. Even now at 77, his memories are still so vivid, it's like he's traveled back in time.
On Alcatraz here, don't underestimate any of these guys. Because on this island, nothing will end in a simple fight. If you step on a toe, it's going to wind up in a death. Because we didn't play no games here.
At least a dozen men died trying to escape from the Rock. So why would anyone want to return?
I have feelings for this old island. It's like it's alive. And it knows me. And I keep coming back.
One of his visits to Alcatraz took Whitey on a trip the tough ex-con could never have imagined. A brief journey to the other side. Johnny House, a convicted murderer, was one of Whitey's closest friends at Alcatraz.
Johnny House, I like Johnny House. He's a big, tough Texan. The reason why I liked him because he walked in his own shoes.
The last day Whitey saw Johnny House was on October 25th, 1962, the day Whitey was released from prison.
I was leaving the island, and I stopped at Johnny House's cell. I remember telling him, you know, I'm getting out. It was nice knowing you, Johnny. And I remember him saying, it's my pleasure. It's just like reliving it. I remember that day. As I started walking down Broadway after I said so long to him, I didn't want him to see me because, like I am now, I was dropping tears. And I knew that This is the last time, probably never see him again. And old Johnny died later on in prison.
But for one astonishing moment, Whitey actually saw his old friend Johnny again. One day, 20 years after Whitey's release, he was waiting to give a lecture to visitors about his time on Alcatraz.
And I was up in the cell house. I was alone in the cell house, kind of reminiscing. And so I walked over around the corner here in front of my cell, and I happened to look down the end of the corridor here. We call this Michigan Avenue, and way down the end there, I seen this like a black silhouette, and a big tall guy, and I know he was staring down this way. I couldn't see his face. He was all black, but he was staring down this way, and I was wondering who it was. Then all of a sudden, he disappeared from sight over behind B Block, and I quickly ran down to the cutoff and to run around to try to intercept him. And I got around there, and I couldn't see him nowheres. And when I got up there was nobody there, and the doors was locked. They were locked, and it was gone. And I just know that this was Johnny's house. I could feel the vibe. I could just feel that this was Johnny's house. The way he walked, it was just like the way Johnny's house moved. And I don't care what anyone says, I know that was Johnny's house.
That day turned the hard-nosed, skeptical ex-convict into a true believer in the supernatural.
I believe this old prison has a lot of spirits here, or ghosts, whatever you want to call them, and for some reason or other, they don't go on to the next plane.
8 men were murdered here by other inmates. Not surprising, considering that many of those held on America's Devil's Island were the most notorious men in our nation's criminal history. Legendary gangsters like Al Scarface Capone, Los Angeles kingpin Mickey Cohen, Machine Gun Kelly, and the famous Birdman Robert Stroud all passed from this world to the next. Yet Whitey Thompson believes that the souls of these dangerous men still rule this prison with malevolent force.
A lot of these guys that are dead and gone now still carried a lot of hatred with them. Some of these spirits are still hanging around here.
We'll delve deeper into the strange history of Alcatraz when we come back, and meet a man who stood watch over the world's most notorious convicts. The mysterious history of Alcatraz predates the prison itself. Shunned by local Indians as a place of evil spirits, the island was first occupied during the gold rush of the 1850s by the U.S. Army. To protect the gold-laden harbor from attack, they built a fortress complete with dungeons. In 1909, the Army tore down much of the citadel to build a modern prison. The first floor became the foundation for the new facility, and the jailers found a new purpose for its darkened rooms.
These are called the Spanish dungeons. Those dungeons were built as storage areas for the Army. The Army used them for sometimes putting unruly Indians in there, too. And they also put unruly Army inmates in there.
According to the inmates who were chained to the walls or the floor and left for days, it was highly effective. Just above the old dungeons are their modern counterparts, the cold, unlit cells reserved for solitary confinement. The isolation drove many men insane, but even madness was preferable to death at the hands of a legendary, invisible killer. According to one account, an inmate screamed for 3 days that there was another man in his isolation cell. When guards could no longer ignore his cries, they finally opened his door, and the inmate was found dead, with unexplainable marks around his neck. But that is just one of the many bizarre episodes that mark the prison's dramatic history, that includes some of the most daring breakouts ever attempted.
They had a total of 36 inmates and 14 tried to escape from Alcatraz. Most were brought back, some were shot and killed, and some drowned.
The impenetrability of Alcatraz only added to its mystique.
No media was ever allowed over here. They kept all media out, no newspapers, anything like that was allowed here on Alcatraz Island.
If a guard on this island ever got caught talking to a reporter or anybody, he was fired immediately.
That's the mystery. That's the mystique. You know, what's going on that island? What is going on?
Frank Heaney was just 21 when he came to work on Alcatraz as a prison guard. He served from 1948 to 1951. It would be the longest 3 years of his life.
I'll tell you what made the job tough for me is that we were living in an era of doom, gloom, despair, and despondency. Every day it prevailed it. You could feel it when you walked in. You could feel it when you walked out.
Though he survived his wounds, other inmates were stabbed to death in this same location. Park Ranger Laurie Brosnan says that visitors often report a disturbing chill when they pass through this area.
A nighttime security guard who was on patrol. He's the only man in the building. And he walks into the shower room basement area and he feels a hand on his shoulder. Turns around, nobody's there. That was spooky for him.
In 1963, Attorney General Robert Kennedy ordered the decaying prison closed. The remaining inmates were either paroled or transferred to other prisons. Though the cells are now empty, a lingering presence remains.
Any place was going to have a mysterious, a ghosty type effect. I think it would be here in Alcatraz with the characters that are on this island, the things that have happened over the years, some of the bad things of people being killed.
When we come back, the most vicious incident in the prison's history. Plus, some ghost hunters who got a lot more than they bargained for. May 1946, the date of the largest and most deadly escape ever attempted at the Rock, known as the Battle for Alcatraz. Prison guards, along with Marine troops, battled 6 armed inmates for 48 hours. 3 of the inmates, Clarence Carnes, Sam Shockley, and Myron Thompson, retreated to their cells and were captured. The other 3, Bernard Coy, Marvin Hubbard, and Joseph Kretzer, were cornered in the utility corridor between cell blocks. The guards tossed hand grenades into the corridor from above and fired machine guns from the doorway. Coy, Hubbard, and Kretzer died in the battle. 36 years later, the spirits of the 3 men who died in that corridor materialized with the help of a most unlikely ally.
Took out a shop, and they're still on the scene. They're concerned about...
Award-winning broadcaster Ted Wygant is an institution in San Francisco radio. In 1982, the ever-skeptical Wygant invited well-known psychic Gene Borgen to spend the night on Alcatraz looking for ghosts.
We were spending the night on Alcatraz. Rangers would be with us, and the object was to see if we could find a ghost or 2.
For hours, Ted and Gene searched much of the prison with minimal results. However, when they crossed the threshold of the utility corridor, they had the encounter of a lifetime.
About 3 o'clock in the morning, we went into the utility alleyway between the 2 cell blocks. This was a passageway in which the 3 men were finally trapped. The door was closed, it was pitch black, and he started calling for whatever the troubled spirits were. And quite frankly, I thought, this is really stupid. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, I haven't had any sleep, and we're doing this. Why?
The answer came in a shocking rush of undeniable power.
Suddenly, I got this tremendous feeling of anger, and I felt this presence beneath us in the dirt where these 3 men had died. It was something different and fearful, because it was this total anger, maybe bordering on rage at what was beneath us, and it was an evil. I felt an evil beneath us. At that point, I recall feeling that if I had a gun, I would have started shooting in the direction of where these, whatever they were beneath us.
Ted, he actually yelled something very sharp, very angry. And there were a few little cuss words in there, and that's what alerted me that something was really wrong. So I turned directly to him, and at that point, his face was very changed. It was like I wasn't looking at Ted. Something was in that corridor that I was seeing and feeling, and that Ted, I know, was feeling. You could just see the anger and hate coming out of his eyes, and this is not a typical Ted at all. And at that point, I immediately reacted to his anger. It was very traumatic. I mean, the anger and hate I felt toward him at that moment was astounding. I was going to kill him to get out of that corridor. I was going to strangle him to death, but I was going to get over him and out that door.
Concerned for Ted and herself, Jean asked that the door be opened.
And at that particular point, Ted sort of shook, and his face then relaxed. And then I was looking at Ted again. And then the minute he relaxed, I relaxed.
I was extremely bothered with what had happened. For me, at that moment, it was absolutely real.
3 vicious killers had died violently in the narrow room. Is it possible that the spirits of Coy, Kretzer, and Hubbard remain entombed within that corridor?
It still is difficult for me. I can't say that there was something there. I can only say that something happened.
Other attempts to explore the paranormal aspects of Alcatraz have proven equally disturbing. A psychic who was taking the tour of the prison was paralyzed with fright when a man materialized in a cell and threatened her with a weapon. Even those who work at Alcatraz are not immune to its unexplained power. Laurie Brosnan first visited the island as a child with her father, a freelance cinematographer. She is now a park ranger, stationed on Alcatraz for the last 12 years.
I've heard late at night when I'm in a cell trying to doze off to sleep, I've heard the cell doors sound, which is a very unique sound. The devices that operate those cell doors are locked. I am the only one on the island with a key, so there's no way anybody else could be creating that sound. The sound of the cell door, I really heard it. It was not a dream, it was something I heard.
Night watchmen, alone on the island, have heard the sounds of harmonicas playing, doors opening and closing, and inmates whispering amongst themselves.
Anytime you come to a real historical facility like Alcatraz, you expect to find activity of some kind.
Dr. Larry Mons and Dana Smoller of the International Society for Paranormal Research are exploring the prison for evidence of paranormal activity.
Earlier this morning, we were just really primarily going through to kind of see if maybe I picked up on some different kinds of clairvoyant information.
They first explored D Block, solitary confinement.
Yeah, I don't feel anybody in here.
Dana and Larry found nothing of consequence until they went into the old laundry building. As Dana walked through the sewing area on the second floor, Larry followed with a magnetometer, a device which measures changes in magnetic fields.
Yeah, because my hands are just, they're just buzzing so tremendously right through here. And now it feels like pins. I'm getting pins and needles.
As they continued their walk through the area, Dr. Mons monitored his magnetometer.
Wait, it spiked again.
You know what? I just got pain right through here, right standing.
And it just spiked. As soon as you walked past this area, it spiked.
It's right. Right when I crossed over here.
Yeah. And now it's gone again.
And again, a few minutes later, the magnetometer jumped.
Look at this. Look at that. See, now that, it's spiked pretty high. Unless there's a really electromagnetic device right here somewhere that would cause that to take place, I could see that, but there was nothing. And here we are in the middle of the room getting 0, and all of a sudden now it spikes. So what this means with a temporary electromagnetic field, there's definitely some type of paranormal activity taking place now.
But is there any connection between their experience in the room and past events? A subsequent conversation with head ranger Craig Glassner revealed this little-known fact. A lethal knife attack did indeed once take place in the sewing area.
There was a movie a few years ago called Murder in the First, in which a murder occurs between inmates in the mess hall. In fact, it was in that building that Henry Young murdered an inmate by the name of Rufus McCain. That was something in the movie changed because they didn't want to film down there.
Coincidence? Perhaps. But it is remarkable that of all the places the investigators covered, the most significant activity occurred in the sewing area, the place of a specific and deadly incident, and one of which the investigators could not have known. Sudden death, spectral assassins, and a pervasive, ominous presence of inexplicable power. There is little question that Alcatraz holds a particular place in our collective imagination, consistently evoking feelings both stirring and dark.
Especially when it's a quiet night and you're by yourself, and I don't know, I can kind of sense them around me. Even right now, as I'm talking to you, I feel that we're being watched.
Escape from Alcatraz is now a simple boat ride. But for those who feel haunted by the experience, the island's power is impossible to leave behind.